The real issue is that what the Narrabri project will do is push up New South Wales gas prices, and that's because the Narrabri gas fields have relatively high production costs, and they have much higher production costs than the gas that's currently supplying New South Wales from the Cooper Basin.
That just seems ridiculous to me, that it's not going to bring gas prices down, it's actually going to drive them up. That's like absurd.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
One for Mum, one for Dad, and one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian.
Budgets are about choices, Fran, and you show what you value through the choices you make.
Dead, buried, cremated.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared. The Treasurer.
Australia's basically done for. We'll just end up being a third-rate economy. You know, a banana republic.
How good is Australia?
Just follow the money.
G'day, and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast demystifying the big economic issues in Australia and putting them in plain English. I'm Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director at the Institute, and we're recording this on Tuesday, the 11th of August 2020. The gas industry has been positioning itself to be a recipient of government stimulus spending for the economic recovery, and also using the need for jobs as a reason to approve new gas projects. The National COVID Recovery Commission, the NCCC, has a disproportionate amount of members connected to the gas industry and has, surprise, surprise, proposed expanding the gas industry as a major focus of the economic recovery. The Australian Energy Minister, Angus Taylor, has called for a gas-fired recovery. And one of the main gas projects that the government and the industry want approved is the Narrabri coal seam gas project in northwest New South Wales.
We need to get the gas from under our feet.
Once the COVID-19 threat passes, the question is now being asked whether the world's economies will be looking to the fossil fuel industry to lead the recovery.
By massively opening up the domestic gas market, which it says in turn...
The Santos coal seam gas project at Narrabri has yet to secure the final state environmental approvals, despite the company's considerable investment.
Oh look, it's somewhere in the region of around $1.5 billion.
Where they want to drill for gas in the Pilliga is the southern recharge of the Great Artesian Basin. It is the single most vital area in New South Wales.
Arrogant, bullying industry wants to walk over the top of everybody, walk over the top of you, walk over the top of farmers, walk over the top of people wanting to preserve nature.
We've seen gas prices coming down and we're starting to see more gas supply coming into the market. That's great progress, but we want to go further.
When you've had enough of paying the world's highest electricity prices, talk to Australia's largest solar company.
One of the best ways of bouncing back after the corona crisis would be to boost renewable energy spending in Australia.
So today I'm joined by Mark Ogge, the Principal Advisor at the Australia Institute, for part one of a two-part episode to discuss the gas industry in Australia and the Santos Narrabri project. G'day, Mark.
Hi, Ebony.
Thanks for joining me. Can you, to begin with, give us a bit of context about the gas industry in Australia? How big is it and what is its impact?
Sure. Look, when we talk about the gas industry in Australia, it's actually a bit misleading because what the gas industry is in Australia is a whole bunch of huge multinational global oil and gas companies operating that we allow to extract gas in Australia. So over the last 10 years, there's been a huge expansion in the amount of gas that these companies extract. In Australia overall, we've doubled the amount of gas we allow them to extract, and on the east coast of Australia, we've actually tripled it just in about the last 5 or 6 years. So it's been a huge expansion to the point where we've overtaken Qatar as the world's largest producer of liquefied natural gas.
We've overtaken Qatar.
Yeah, so in terms of liquefied natural gas, which is gas that's exported, because most of the gas that we're producing in Australia is actually exported overseas as turned into a liquid and exported as liquefied natural gas, and we've overtaken Qatar as the largest exporter of liquefied natural gas in the world.
Wow.
Yeah.
I know we've talked about the gas industry a couple of times on Follow the Money, but We hear all the time that there's a shortage of gas in Australia, and what you're saying is really we've had a massive increase in the amount of gas that we produce and export.
Yeah, it's the expansion is actually historically enormous, like on the East Coast, to have actually tripled the amount of gas we produce in just in about 5 or 6 years through opening up these massive export terminals in Gladstone is, one of the largest and fastest expansion of gas production anywhere in the world. So there's absolutely no shortage of gas in Australia. The problem is that we're allowing these big global companies to just export it overseas.
And so one of these big projects is the Narrabri Gas Project. Can you explain what it is?
Yeah, so the Narrabri Gas Project is a coal seam gas project in northwest New South Wales near a town called Narrabri, and it's very similar to those in Queensland that people have probably heard about. And just to understand what coal seam gas is, coal is ancient petrified forests that get compacted under the ground and form layers of carbon. And we call those layers coal seams. And the coal seams contain three things. They contain coal, water and methane. And the water pressure keeps the methane in the coal seam. So what the coal seam gas operators do is they pull out all of that water and dewater the coal seam over vast areas, and that allows the gas to migrate up through the wells, and then they take that off and either export it or use it locally. But it also allows gas to come up all over the place, like in the Condamine, famously in the Condamine River, where we've seen that bubbling. So it's a big geological experiment, if you like, on a vast scale.
You mentioned there the Condamine River, and people might remember, is that the one where the Greens upper house member Jeremy Buckingham set the river on fire? Is that what you were talking about?
Yeah, that's the one. Yep. So around the Condamine River is where coal seam gas operations took place, and that's where they were dewatering coal seam, so taking the pressure off the methane and to allow it to come up through the wells. And it appears that it's also allowed it to come up through fissures in the ground and bubble up through the Condamine River, and that's the thing that Jeremy Buckingham highlighted a few years ago.
Mm-hmm. And so where does the Narrabri Gas Project fit in here?
So the Narrabri Gas Project is that type of gas extraction. It's a project of about 850 wells spread over 950 kilometres of the beautiful Pilliga State Forest and some adjoining farmland. All of those wells, of course, will be connected up with roads and pipelines and other kind of big gas infrastructure, and it'll produce, if it goes ahead, it'll produce around 70 petajoules of gas a year, which is equivalent to about 3.5% of the East Coast gas supply.
Wow. So just to help people visualise there, when you're talking about wells, it's actually, it's a bunch of little wells dotted all over the countryside, not some kind of big mammoth all in one spot concentration, one big gas well.
No, so picture this Pilliga State Forest, so 950 square kilometres of it, and that will have 850 wells all about, a kilometre apart, and they'll all be connected by roads and water and gas gathering pipelines, and dispersed in between those will be huge water treatment plants where they keep all the wastewater and gas and other kind of gas compression stations and processing facilities. So it's quite industrial, and it really carves up those areas.
From my perspective and from a Santos perspective was the recognition and the public acknowledgement that gas has to play a central part of any emissions reduction strategies.
Gas is often talked about as part of the transition away from coal and towards renewables, but it is a fossil fuel. So what are the greenhouse gas emissions from a project like this?
The greenhouse gas emissions from this are estimated by Santos and the government to be somewhere between 120 and 128 million tonnes over the life of the project, and that will be around 5 million tonnes a year. And as a point of comparison, that's equivalent, that 128 million tonnes is equivalent to almost a full year of New South Wales greenhouse gas emissions.
Wow, a full year of the whole state of New South Wales.
Of the whole state, yeah. And I think quite shockingly, the government department that has assessed the project described that as small and said it was consistent with Australia's global climate commitments under the Paris Agreement, which is simply untrue, because we know from carbon budget analysis that we have to keep most of existing reserves in the ground, and that new big gas and coal and oil projects are actually contradict Australia's commitment under the Paris Agreement.
You've, I think, mentioned that one of the main arguments for the project in the submission that you drew up is that New South Wales needs this gas, and that Santos and the government have argued that the Narrabri gas projects could supply about half of New South Wales gas, and it could help avoid gas shortages in the state. I mean, is that true?
No, what that reveals, so the government's accepted Santos's arguments on this, but what it reveals is a real misunderstanding of how the gas system works, because the gas network in Eastern Australia is a completely interconnected system that doesn't where state boundaries are irrelevant, and it's also connected to the global gas market through the export facilities at Gladstone. So it doesn't matter how much gas is produced in one or another state, because ultimately that gas can just be exported. So, for instance, in the case of the Narrabri gas project, if the gas from that project actually did supply consumers in New South Wales, then Santos can simply send the equivalent amount of less gas from its Cooper Basin reserves that are currently supplying customers in New South Wales, and that gas would be freed up for export. So it makes no difference to energy security in New South Wales, and for the government department not to understand that shows a real lack of understanding of how the gas market works.
And just to go back to that first point that I made, there is no shortage of gas, is there?
Well, gas will deplete over time, and ultimately it's going to run out no matter how much gas you produce. But the problem...
But that's not what the government is talking about when it talks about a gas shortage, is it?
No, it's not, because the problem in Australia is that we're exporting vast quantities of gas, twice the amount of gas that we're actually producing overseas every year. And the crucial point is that if you produce more gas in Australia, if you get Narrabri going or other gas fields in Queensland or wherever, that gas can simply be exported. So it doesn't play any part in reducing a risk of gas shortages in Australia. And what's also really important to understand is that the government ignored in its assessment of the project, ignored the Australian domestic gas security mechanism, which is the main policy that the government has to stop shortages in Australia. So what happens there is if the Australian Energy Market Operator warns of a shortage coming up, then the Australian government can simply declare a shortfall year and dictate that the LNG companies that are exporting gas supply that gas to the domestic market. So it's inconceivable that if there was a shortage of domestic gas in Australia, that the Australian government would just allow gas to continue to be exported overseas. So that is a backstop that prevents actual shortages to Australian customers.
Scott Morrison plans to get electricity prices down by increasing the supply of gas.
See that gas come out from under people's feet, because when it does, that means it takes the pressure off electricity prices. But there's no...
Santos has also argued that this gas project will bring down gas prices in New South Wales. What's your work found in relation to that claim?
Well, Santos originally argued that, but then under questioning from the expert review that the government subjected to their EIS, they actually acknowledged that it wouldn't bring down gas prices in Australia. And despite that, the department still argued, despite Santos saying that it wouldn't bring down gas prices, the department still argued that it would. And then on top of that, a couple of weeks ago, the director of the department was questioned by the Independent Planning Commission looking into the project, and he actually also acknowledged that it wouldn't bring down gas prices. So
the proponent, Santos, is saying it's not going to bring down gas prices, but somehow the New South Wales government is still saying that it will.
Absolutely. Even despite the fact that their own director has said that it wouldn't. But the real issue is that what the Narrabri project will do is push up New South Wales gas prices. And that's because the Narrabri gas fields have relatively high production costs, and they have much higher production costs than the gas that's currently supplying New South Wales from the Cooper Basin. So
sorry, when you say it's got higher production costs, basically to get it out of the ground costs more in Narrabri, for example, than it would out of the Cooper Basin.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. The Australian Energy Market Operator has estimated that the cost of producing gas in Narrabri, because it's more difficult to extract, is much higher than Cooper Basin gas. And so the Narrabri gas project would displace cheaper gas from the Cooper Basin and lock New South Wales consumers into higher gas prices. That just seems ridiculous to me, that we'd be, taking these claims seriously when it's not going to bring gas prices down. It's actually going to drive them up. That's absurd. Yeah, well, I mean, I was really surprised at how the assessment done by the New South Wales Department of Planning, Industry and the Environment just overlooked these really basic things in its analysis of Santos's claims about the need for the project and its economic benefits. Santos has also argued that the gas is needed for our gas-fired power stations in order to support renewable energy. Can you just unpack that argument? Because it's not an obvious one, I think, for many people. Yeah, so Santos is saying that because renewable energy is only available when the wind's blowing and the sun's shining, then you need some kind of a power that can be dispatched at any time to make sure you can supply energy when it's needed. But of course, these days you don't need gas, and gas has traditionally fulfilled that role through what you call gas-fired peaking plants. But those days are over, because that exact same service can now be supplied by renewable energy with energy storage, and that energy storage can either be from solar thermal power, pumped hydro or batteries, and that provides exactly the same service, and it's already cheaper than gas from peaking power stations, and it's projected to get cheaper relative to gas over the next few decades. So if we did provide gas for that, it would actually lock in higher electricity prices for New South Wales consumers as well. And on top of that, the Australian Energy Market Operator actually projects that a huge drop in demand for gas-fired electricity power stations over the next few decades anyway. So even the Energy Market Operator doesn't think that's going to happen. Another big part of the justification for the project is obviously the jobs and economic benefits, particularly for the local region. What kind of impact will it have on the local community, and do the locals really want this project? So the department's really taken Santos's word for it, which is based on economic modelling that Santos commissioned from Acel Allen Consultants. And their modelling suggests that there would be around 200 additional ongoing jobs through the operational period, and a short period of about 1,300 additional jobs during construction over a few years. And that comes from the economic modelling that this company has done, and the government's pretty much accepted that. But economic modelling is a very different thing to actual experience. And when we look at what's actually happened in Queensland, we can see that there's been very mixed results and a lot of negative impacts of the expansion of the coal seam gas industry. And one example is that the most detailed survey of local people about how they felt the gas industry had impacted their region. They asked people from the government, from the coal and gas industry, from the local business community and others. They surveyed all of these stakeholders, and those stakeholders overwhelmingly found that the expansion of the gas industry had actually led to a deterioration in pretty much all types of capital in their local community, including financial capital, built capital, which is infrastructure, social cohesion and other ways that measure the assets in the local community. So the perception of local people is that there's very negative results. And when you look at the data on the jobs impact, it's very different to the model data that you see from Santos and ACL Allen. For instance, the CSIRO found that for every new coal seam gas job, there was jobs created, there was about 1.8 agricultural jobs lost. So a big fall in agricultural jobs because the expansion of the coal seam gas industry crowded out jobs in the farming sector.
So overall, the public really thinks these types of projects have a negative impact on their community, and what Santos says in its modelling is very different to the lived experience on the ground. Yeah, look, some people definitely benefit from these projects. So there's a kind of a business elite in some towns who own some real estate, who own waste disposal facilities, that kind of thing. They do pretty well out of it. But a whole lot of other businesses like local farming businesses and industries that supply the agricultural sector and people who just have to pay rent in town and all of those kind of things, they get squeezed out and jobs get lost in those sectors, and it causes a lot of hardship for industries other than those directly related to the gas industry. And lastly, Mark, what do you think about this idea of a gas-fired recovery that we keep hearing about? Is it a good idea? Well, look, the whole idea of recovery is that we're trying to create jobs, because that is the preeminent problem. We've lost or are in the process of losing a vast amount of jobs. Now, the gas industry is very good at getting the gas out of the ground without using people. It's highly automated, and it's one of the least jobs-intensive industries in Australia. So it creates less jobs per dollar invested than pretty much any other industry in Australia. So if the objective is to create jobs, then it's, supporting any other industry is probably better than supporting the gas industry. Well, thanks very much, Mark. No worries. Thanks, Ebony. This has been a special episode of Follow the Money, and we're aiming to bring you shorter but more frequent episodes during the pandemic, so please stay tuned. And if you've enjoyed our last couple of episodes, leave us a review on iTunes. It helps other people to find the podcast. And just a reminder that this is part 1 of 2 episodes that we're going to be doing on the Australian gas industry and on the Narrabri project in particular. So please tune in again next week for part 2 when we talk to Rod Campbell, our research director at the Australia Institute. You can check out the Australia Institute's Economics of a Pandemic webinar series at our website. It's free, but registration is essential, so visit tai.org.au/webinars to register. For the latest health information, you can check health.gov.au or listen to the ABC's excellent CoronaCast podcast, which comes out daily. We're on Twitter at the Oz Institute with an AUS, and my Twitter handle is Ebony_Bennett with a ~T. Mark Ogge is at Mark Ogge, that's OGGE, and this episode was produced by Jennifer Macey with help from Holly Forrest. Our theme music is by Jonathan McFeat from Pulse and Thrum, and please keep washing those hands, wear a mask if you can, stay safe, stay 1.5 metres away, and thanks for listening.